Hi, my name is Steve Quarles. I'm a scientist with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. I've been invited here by the North Topanga Canyon Fire Safe Council, and our objective here is to visit certain homes in the area and evaluate these homes and do sort of a home assessment with the aid of the homeowner, and to discuss the various features of their homes, the components such as the roof, the siding, windows, decks, and some of the vegetation near the home, and discuss how those factors can make their home vulnerable to wildfire and some of the things they can do to help their home survive a wildfire. One of the first things you notice with this house is that there's a lot of tree limbs overhanging the roof, which results in a lot of debris accumulated on top of the roof. The problem with debris accumulated on top of the roof is that that debris is easily ignited by embers. This particular roof is a Class A fire-rated roof. It's an asphalt composition shingle roof. It can resist that kind of exposure. The problem with this house would be the debris accumulation in the gutter and on top of the gutter cover that we see on this house. Embers will ignite that debris and result in a flaming exposure to the edge of the roof. And it's the wood in the fascia board or the wood on the roof sheathing that would be vulnerable under that kind of flaming exposure. So we notice on this house that they have a wooden deck. A wood deck is one of a number of kinds of combustible decking materials. There's the wood decks, there are wood plastic composite decks. These combustible decks are vulnerable in particular when there's debris stored underneath the deck. And in this case, we notice that there's debris that is accumulated in between the deck boards. This debris is readily ignitable by, again, wind-blown embers during a wildfire. So the homeowner should regularly clean the debris from between the deck boards. This becomes a particular problem when you have a combustible siding, and as we do on this house also. It's a wood siding product that extends all the way to the deck. So there's no separation between the deck boards and the siding. And it's particularly a problem when you have some rot in the wood siding, as we do to the right of the entry door. You can tell by that depressed part of the wood that's rotted, that is easily ignited. And we also notice that there's some leaves accumulating at the base of that wall, also easily ignited. So clean the deck, and then particularly in this kind of case, you want to make sure that you repair decayed wood, because it is more easily ignited from fire. So this deck has a lot of furniture on it, and this furniture we're looking at here happens to be wooden furniture. The members are kind of large, so it's not going to be so easily ignited by embers. But we notice that this furniture and many other kinds of furniture, even non-combustible furniture, has a combustible cushion. So during Santa Ana wind conditions or when wildfire threatens, you should take these cushions and move them inside, for example, or throw them off the deck, whatever is more convenient, because these cushions would be pretty readily ignitable by embers, then potentially igniting the furniture, and the furniture is now pretty close to the side of the house, which would then potentially give a flame contact or radiant exposure to the siding. One thing we've noticed, observed in laboratory studies, is that screens are really effective in keeping radiant and helping windows resist radiant heat exposure. In order for that to happen, and also keeping embers out, in order for that to happen, the screens need to be in place. So for all windows, we recommend screening. We also recommend maintaining the screen so that it stays in place and in good condition. So we notice on this edge of the roof there's a metal drip edge. This is a very good detail, particularly when you have a debris-filled gutter. It helps protect the roof edge from any debris that might be accumulated unbeknownst to you in the gutter. So when it ignites, when that debris ignites from a flame, from ember exposure, this drip edge will help protect the edge of your roof. So it's an inexpensive thing to do, and it's very effective in helping your home survive a wildfire. You'll notice in this roof eave area that there's a bird's nest right underneath the roof sheathing. This bird's nest would be very vulnerable to ignition from embers, providing a flaming exposure to the underside of the eave. If it catches the under eave area on fire, then it's easier for the fire to move inside the house. Once the fire moves inside the house, there's a lot of combustible things inside that can also be ignited. So on this side of the house, we notice that there's some green grass pretty close to the house, and then we have this brick walkway that leads to the entry door. But we also notice that really right next to the house, there's a lot of debris that's accumulated from the surrounding vegetation. Our research has shown, and others have confirmed, that the area really close to the house is critical to homes surviving a wildfire. So because combustible debris like mulch or leaves near the house would be readily ignited by embers, and then you'd have a flame contact exposure to the side of the house, or in this case, to the underside of this bump out. So in lieu of having combustible bark mulch, you could have stone or rock mulch in this place to provide the same kind of feature that a combustible bark mulch would do. And this is really critical near the house, not as important further away from the house in terms of the in terms of the rock mulch versus bark mulch issue. So we have this combustible fence roughly 6 feet or so from the house, and a lot of vegetation on the other side of the fence. This fence has some decay in it and a lot of debris accumulating on some of the support members. So it would be pretty easily ignited. If it was ignited, it would be easy for it to provide a flaming exposure or radiant exposure to the side of the house. That's where these screens that are in place would be a good thing. We also notice that we have a door here that goes into a utility closet. It has some openings. It looks like it used to be a hot water heater closet, which is no longer, but if we open it up, we'll notice that there aren't any screens on the upper louvered vent and the lower louvered vent that were here for when it was a hot water heater closet to provide makeup air. So there's typically would be combustible things inside of this now utility closet. Embers can readily enter into the closet through these openings and ignite any combustible materials that might be there. So for this door, we want to just remember it's like any other vent where embers can enter. And you want to screen it, preferably with at least 1/8 of an inch mesh screen to minimize the number and size of embers that can enter into this enclosed space. So this house we see is a split level house. It has two roof levels with siding in between. And we notice that on the lower roof, there's an accumulation of debris from the overhanging tree here. So this roof covering is a Class A asphalt comp roof covering. What makes this home vulnerable then isn't the Class A roof, it is the siding next to the Class A roof. This is a wood shingle roof. A roof shingle siding. If the debris that's on the lower part of the roof ignites, then potentially you'll have a flame contact exposure to this readily ignitable wood shingle siding, which then will provide a flaming exposure to the window potentially or to the shingles and move into the house in that way. So in this case, the Class A roof is being bypassed by the siding and the debris buildup that would be the ignition point that would lead to the ignition of the home and potentially the loss of the home. So another location on a roof that can be vulnerable to debris accumulation and ember ignition would be a chimney chase that has a combustible wood siding or a combustible siding. It can be wood or vinyl, any kind of combustible siding. If debris accumulates against that siding on top of the Class A roof, it is the siding that would be the vulnerable part of the assembly, not the Class A roof itself. So this home is built on a crawl space. It has crawl space vents around the perimeter of the house. This is as a 1/4-inch mesh screen. We would recommend a finer mesh screen, maybe 1/8 of an inch. That would reduce the number and the size of embers that can enter. Also notice there's some debris in back of the vent. I would suggest that the homeowner go into the crawl space and remove this debris. What you want to do is get rid of fine fuels that would be more easily ignited by embers. This house has wood shingle siding. It's one of the more combustible siding products that home could have. You notice here that it's dry, it's sort of wearing. There's a lot of weathering that goes on here. Looks like this was an attached deck at one point, but people sometimes wonder whether there's a coating they could apply or a stain they could apply that would help with the fire resistance of a combustible siding material. And clearly there are things you can put on, but right now, at least, the technology hasn't advanced to the point where it would weather well. So whereas you could put something on today and it'd be good tomorrow, some period of time from now it won't be good anymore, and we don't know how long that will be. So in this case, you might want to put on a stain to help the wood weather better, last longer potentially. But in terms of a fire retardant coating, there just isn't one right now that can be used, that you can rely on. But we'll notice in this particular house, they have bare dirt in front of their siding. You know, if you're going to have this kind of siding, this is exactly the kind of ground you want. You want a non-combustible zone near the home. This is bare dirt. You can use rock mulch, you can use stone mulch, but what you don't want to have is combustible mulch or other things, given the kind of siding that we have here. And you want to make sure that the siding does not get down close to the ground, because then you can just have ember accumulation next to this wood siding product, and it would ignite by the embers themselves. So you want to make sure you have this clearance between the ground and the start of the siding with this non-combustible foundation, this concrete foundation. You want to have 6 inches or so of this separation. So we see here the soffitted eave, or boxed-in eave, it's also called. This is one of 2 ways that you can enclose an eave, or you can build an eave. The other way is to have an open framing where you can actually look down and look up and see the rafter tails. The rafter tail or open eave construction tends to trap heat. If flame or heat gets underneath it, it makes it easier. It's easier to ignite. And so boxing in is a really good thing from a resist of flame potential. This is a plywood soffitted eave. It's not as good as a non-combustible soffit material, but it's definitely better than open eave construction. The other thing that we've observed in some lab studies is that vents in a soffitted eave aren't as vulnerable to ember entry as vents in an open eave type of construction. So from an ember perspective and from a flame contact perspective, soffitting or boxing in your eave is a much better way to go. So here we have some woody vegetation right next to the house. This is something we don't recommend. Even though the leaves of this particular vegetation have some good characteristics, the waxy leaf keep moisture in, it has some woody material behind it, and it's attached to a wood trellis material, wood trellis, and it has a combustible bird's nest on the top of it. So, and the other thing that we notice in this particular location is that there's a lot of dead leaves that have accumulated at the base of this trellis vegetation. So, we don't recommend having woody vegetation next to the house. In this case, these leaves could be ignited by embers, potentially igniting then the woody part anyway of this plant. And it has some fine fuels, and it's right next to a door that has single pane windows in it. So these are more easily broken by radiant and direct flame contact, which they would probably see if this were to ignite. This home has open eave construction, and so it tends to trap heat up in this upper area, in the under eave area, and it has some combustible roof sheathing material, which could then be ignited getting into the home via that route. So on this house, we see that we have a vinyl gutter. Now this gutter has a gutter cover, but it's been removed in this last section. There's a debris that's accumulated inside of this gutter and on top of the gutter cover. But more importantly, with this particular section, and what happens with vinyl gutters in general with debris in them is that they don't stay on the side of the house when the debris ignites. They detach and fall to the ground, and so they become another fuel source for whatever is on the ground. So in this case, it would be for the trellis vegetation. This would be an additional fuel source once ignited, and once it falls, to ignite that trellis and trellis vegetation and provide a flaming contact exposure to the window on the door. So this house has an overhang that has some combustible things stored underneath it. This is similar to a deck that people might store combustible things underneath. In this case, though, there's living space over top of this bump out. And given that there are combustible things, there's some plastic tubs with stuff in them. And one tub, we noticed the lid is removed. So this is one area where that open tub might be ignited by embers. The material inside of it might be ignited by embers. I think it's important to note that there's really not much debris accumulating in this area, which is a good thing. But given the amount of combustibles in the tubs, and I noticed that there's a small door into what would appear to be a crawl space that is open, the embers can flow in there. This would be one candidate for enclosing the deck with a combustible material, a non-combustible material, to protect these tubs and that open area. I don't really advise enclosing decks generally, but in this case, since there's living space above, there isn't any way for water to come down into this enclosed area, what would be enclosed area. It seems like it might be a thing that would be an option for this particular house. This house has a corrugated metal roof and a metal gutter. So a corrugated metal roof is non-combustible, that's a good thing. The metal gutter is a good thing as long as debris stays out of it. But if you look closely at the edge of this metal roof, you'll notice that there are openings between the roof and the fascia board so that embers can enter under the roof into the attic space behind it. We normally think of this kind of issue with clay barrel tile roofs and where you have this big opening. In this case, metal roofs have the same issue in the sense that debris can easily get underneath the roof and in back of it, and embers will follow it in during a wildfire and ignite that fine fuel and then ignite other larger combustible materials that may be in the attic, be the framing members or whatever. This is compounded if the metal gutter is full of debris, because that debris will also be readily ignited by embers, and the flames will then be going underneath the roof into the attic space. So if you have this kind of situation, you want to keep debris out of your gutter, because your metal gutter is going to stay put. It's not going to fall to the ground like the vinyl gutter will do. And you want to put some mortar mix or something between as a stop to keep embers and debris from getting underneath this metal roof and getting into what would be the attic space, or getting into the attic space. So here we have some bamboo growing right next to the house. You'll notice that it's not by a window, not immediately behind a window, or not immediately by a window, so that's a good thing, but we still don't like woody vegetation right next to the house. This is stucco cladding, but you notice that there's a lot of the dead leaves that accumulate at the base. It'll ignite this bamboo and the flame will go up the wall and then impinge on the eave area, potentially igniting this combustible eave area that we have on this house and getting into the attic. So the stucco siding is a good thing, but because of the other combustible materials in the area, particularly at the eave, still having combustible vegetation, woody vegetation next to the house is just not advisable. So this house also has a gable end vent. Gable end vents and other kind of vents that would be on a vertical surface. So another example would be a vent in the blocking in open eave construction. These kind of vents are vulnerable to embers entering them. Embers are easily penetrate and get through vents that have this perpendicular face. So in these cases, you want to be sure that you have good screening and 1/8 of an inch minimum. That'll minimize the size and the number that can enter the attic space. You want to make sure you don't store a lot of finely combustible materials in your attic, such as newspapers or old magazines. And in this case, this vent actually, the screen has detached and the bottom part of it. So you would want to make sure that you mended that, fixed it, so there isn't any direct opening from the outside to the inside. This house, almost over all of the vertical surface, has a non-combustible stucco type siding product, except where the electric meter is, in which case we have still a wood panelized siding product. And you'll notice on this sort of box enclosure, there's a lot of debris that's accumulated at the base. This could be easily ignited by embers, providing a flame contact exposure to the siding. And this could be the vulnerability of this particular home, given the non-combustible siding everywhere else. So you need to think of all the smaller things that still might make a home vulnerable, even though generally everything looks good from a material perspective.